Hello. This is Tales of Dread. Tonight, we'll tell you some scary stories about park rangers. So have fun and don't forget to like and subscribe. I work here in the Northern Cascades as a park ranger. This summer, I've been helping out with emergencies, search and rescue, and even some police work. About 20 miles from the Hussman campground, I was working on a trail crew. I moved away from the crew about 100 yards to use the bathroom, and I smelled a strong, sickly sweet smell. It smells a little bit like bear poop, but it's not. As I stood there, I heard twigs breaking down the path. Then I saw a tall, dark figure walking straight toward me. I turned and hid behind a tree. When I turned around to look again, it was maybe 10 feet away. It was black and had a neck that I could see was a bit shorter than I was used to. At the tree, it stopped. I was hiding behind, and its nose was up so it could smell the air. I don't see any eyes that I can see. It then turned around and walked away in the same casual way it had come. I waited a few more minutes to see if it would come back around, then ran back to my crew. I wouldn't tell anyone about what I'd seen. I hope no one ever has to go through something like that. Well, I work at the Grand Canyon as a park ranger. I've been here for a few years and have asked about the strangest people who have gone missing. One of them was from the South Room in 2012, and the other was from the North Room this year. Both of them had drowned and were found dead. In the past few years, there have been other strange things happen, like when an employee died of a heart attack and when a remote part of the park caught on fire. It's not a joke, something strange is going on with the park and the number of people who have gone missing, not just here but everywhere, as well as the strange deaths at Coyote Buttes. Most scary is the area north of the canyon. It's where the last two people who went missing, in 2012 and this year, were found. There is a strong rumor that a skinwalker is in the area, which is close to a reservation. Legends have always been very strange. I can't wait to hear what you think about this. I work for a city park and recreation department here in Colorado. I also serve as a district ranger for the National Park Service. I was trained to be a ranger patroller and love being outside, but I'm not a scientist or a tracker. One evening in 2017, I was driving home from work. It was getting dark, and I was heading east on US 24 toward Berthoud Falls. Before you get right to the falls, there is a turnoff that leads to Rainbow Park, which is a camping area. I was driving down the turnoff, and when I got to the bottom of the road, I saw this huge thing looking at me. At first, I didn't know what it was, but I thought it was a bear. But when I saw wings, I thought it might be a mountain lion with wings, or at least that's how it looked. So I think it's a flying mountain lion because my brain can't figure out what's going on. Then it springs off the ground and flies away. This was not only amazing to see, but it also made my mind go blank. It was huge, with a very big body and wings that were much bigger than my truck. The body was more like a mix of a human and a lion, and the head was more like a big cat. I thought it might be hurt, and I didn't know what it was up to. I could see that it had strange wings, though. Also, they don't look like any of the birds we have on Earth. These are just my guesses, though. I ran into the woods, drove up the road to the park, and got in my truck. I was still shocked by what I had seen, and everything was completely quiet. I could tell right away that it was colder than usual and that something was off. I felt bad in the middle of my stomach. I just tried to get rid of it as best I could, and it seems to have stopped for now. Later, I went back to the place where I saw the UFO and saw that it had landed through the trees and into the woods, leaving huge marks on the ground. I was so confused and scared at the same time. I haven't told anyone about this until now. I would love to tell everybody more about what I saw and where. I wish I had been able to take pictures. But everything happened so quickly, even though I was scared. It honestly made me think of something from Greek mythology or something similar coming to life. I don't know what kind of animal that is, but it had wings and looked like that. Man, it was a whole different thing. We appreciate that you took the time to read this. Hello, I'm sending you this email because I think something is following me through the woods here in Pennsylvania. I work as a park ranger in a state park and for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. I was hiking to a remote campsite one day for work when I saw something I'd never seen before. I've never seen deer act like that before. They were scared like I'd never seen anyone act before. I've seen coyotes and even bears, but this was something different. Dogman is a word I've heard before reading this and after talking to a Native American friend. He said that he had heard of creatures like that. I have to say that I have been followed a few times since the incident. I'm only writing to you because my dad told me that talking to someone who knows what they're talking about would help me. I have promised to carry a weapon with me every time I go out, even on personal occasions. If you decide to read this, maybe your audience can give you some advice. At the time, I worked in the Redwood National Park and only worked at night. I had never seen a counter in the park that was empty, but I had heard that people were seeing them a lot lately. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on a Friday night. So I had time to do what I wanted and catch up on whatever I needed to. I usually had a gun, a radio, and a cell phone with me. The radio was a base radio that could contact the visitor center in case of an emergency. The cell phone was made so that people could talk to each other. It wasn't a personal phone and it wasn't a work phone. It was like getting a cell phone with a stronger signal. As a ranger at night, you could feel very alone, since the visitor center was closed during the day and at these times. So the park was only staffed by other rangers. A lot of the time, there was no one to talk to on the road. The radio was the only way to find out what was going on with the other ranger, who was close by. I took my time making my rounds that night and stopped to enjoy the view. It was one of the best things about the job, even at night. Now, the visitor center was on the west side of the park, and I had to drive all the way around the west side to get to the west side to start my rounds. I would have to take the deep sea trail, which is a very popular path for both mountain bikers and hikers. The trail is open from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. It was very dark and foggy. I only got a radio call a couple of times during my shift but never did. I can see a second ranger. When I was driving on the Dipsy Trail, the fog was so thick that I couldn't see up the road. I was driving about 20 miles per hour and sometimes had to use the brake lights to see where I was going. As I rounded a corner, I thought I saw a mountain biker standing next to a tree, so I took note of him. I told him out loud that he didn't belong here and that the trail was closed. As I got closer, I saw that this person was facing a tree, and wasn't wearing any clothes. It was maybe 3 feet away from the car's fog light, and the person's back was turned to me. I asked the person out loud more than once, but they didn't move. All of my lights were on, and I was about 10 feet away from this person. I kept asking if they were okay, and if they needed help. I started to feel scared. I asked them again if they needed help and turned on the siren. I still did not get a response. There was something wrong. When I was about 5 feet away from the tree where the person was standing, the person just fell over. They were dead, and it looked like their face had been cut off with a knife. Think about how a pumpkin would look if someone had dug into its head and taken its face away. I don't know how they got up and how they fell over. It made me think of something scary that might happen in a movie. But I got out of there, and after telling the other rangers what I saw, they agreed to stay at the station with me and go back to the trail with me. So, in about 10 minutes, we all went down there. The spot on the trail where I first saw the person. But as I got closer to the same spot, I saw a different figure, a naked woman. I slowed down, and she turned her head toward me. The only problem is that I drove right through her, and as soon as she passed or walked through my car, her eyes started to glow red, and then she was gone. The other rangers and I were pretty freaked out and scared. We weren't exactly sure what to do. We were just ready to leave the park. We were ready to finish. As a ranger, I should have reported the body and asked for help, but I was so scared that I had to leave. This is when we went to retrieve that body that I'm talking about. The one with the bird out face. There were no signs of it, no signs of blood, attack, a murder, anything, not even a trail or feet marks. It's as if the body just mysteriously disappeared and then the apparition of the naked woman with glowing eyes. I'm not sure what to think about that, but the last thing I heard and what my co-workers said was that this trailer park is not haunted. But I'm not sure what to think about it either way. Maybe it was a meeting with a demon or something else. I've been in many training sessions and I've seen other rangers have paranormal experiences before. I've been thinking about telling someone outside of work. I just haven't wanted to because I think people will laugh at me or think I'm crazy, but I saw something I didn't understand. It scared me and showed me that some things you see in horror movies are real. I've given this a lot of thought over the years, and I finally decided to talk to someone about it. So, in my setting, I describe seeing a large, unknown creature with 2 legs. I live in Portland, Oregon, but I work at Mount Rainier National Park as a backcountry ranger. I'd like to stay anonymous, so please don't put my name in the paper. After a busy day of trail maintenance on the A loop, I was on my way home from work. At 1:30 in the morning, I was about 15 miles east of Paradise. I was going about 50 miles per hour. I was on the road along the Lewis River. It was a nice night, and I was having a good time driving. I had my high-beam headlights on and was watching my mirrors to avoid deer, which are common in this area. In the past, a big buck almost caused me to wreck my car in the winter when it jumped out in front of me. As I turned the corner and came out of the woods, I saw a large dark figure on the side of the road. Now immediately I'm on edge because in my mind I'm imagining this being a large buck about to jump out in front of my car and I cannot afford the time to make another car payment. I slammed on my brakes because I didn't know what was going to happen. The thing was standing next to a tree on the side of the road, so I knew it wasn't a deer. So I went even slower. I started to focus what little vision I had on this creature, and I could see that it was very, very big, probably about 8 feet tall, and covered in long, shaggy hair that looked very thick and matted. The lighting and shadows made it hard to see the face in detail, but I could tell that it turned to look at me and then stopped, stepped off the road, and into the field. It seemed to know I was there and wasn't surprised to see me. They keep walking on 2 legs away from the road and into the field. I'm telling you right now that it wasn't a bear because it never walked like one. Instead, it always looked like a person walking on 2 legs. The comfortability of bipedal walking, it walked for about a minute, maybe a minute and a half before I could not see it anymore. To say the least, I was shocked. I drove very slowly for a minute to see if I could see it again. But I lost track of it in the end, even though I was shocked. I wasn't very scared. I didn't feel like I was in danger. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It was so big that it was clear it wasn't a bear or a person wearing a suit. Why would someone be out here in the middle of nowhere? It also walked on two legs without any trouble. The next day, I went back to the spot and measured a tree next to which it was standing. So I know it stood about 8.5 feet tall. I've been a park ranger for about half of the last 8 years, and I've never seen anything like this. I have had other interesting things happen to me in the backcountry, but most of them were work-related and had to do with the environment. People often use the word Bigfoot, but I have no idea what it means. Please excuse me and thank you for your time. If you can tell me something, that would be very helpful. Let me just say I'm a former US park ranger. I have been sent to parks all over the United States. I was sent to the Isle Royale National Park and Lake Superior back in 1991. It was my job to walk almost 100 miles of trails in the backcountry and write reports about their conditions. I changed my patrol route every 2 weeks so I wouldn't get too used to the backcountry and could stay alert. During the first half of late August, I moved to the Greenstone area on the west side of the island. The Greenstone is on the island's northeastern side. It looks like a big pile of rocks on a point that looks out over Lake Greenstone Cove. Native Americans used the Greenstone to make tools and other things, and they fished in the area around this point. People also say that the area is full of ghosts, and some of the stories are pretty scary. This area is covered in a very dense spruce forest, and only a few trails go through it. The Greenstone Short Trail is one of the paths. It goes through the woods and ends at the lake's edge. It is a very remote area, and the only way in or out is by barge or the Greenstone Short Trail. So I was walking along the trail's southern end when I came across a clearing. I was just standing there when I started to hear a very strange sound. The sound was like a long, low moan that turned into a very loud sputtering sound. I stood there and listened for a few more minutes before deciding I should go see what was going on. I walked into the open space and looked around. I could see a bunch of old fire pits in the area, and something dark lying on the ground about 50 feet away. I first thought this thing was a bear because it was so heavy. It ended up having 4 legs. So I got out my binoculars and looked, but I couldn't see much detail on the animal. I thought it might be a bear at first, but it was getting too big to be a bear. I stood there for a while it still coughed and groaned. Keep in mind that it was kind of hidden in tall grass. I started to think that maybe this bear or animal was sick or hurt. So I moved around to see if I could get closer without being in its line of sight and get a better view. When I did that, the animal was gone, but the sounds of it groaning stayed. There was something wrong. Something this big couldn't have gotten up and left my sight that quickly. Even after it was gone, I could still feel it. Everything went quiet in the woods around me, and I had a creeping feeling in my stomach that I needed to leave because I was in immediate danger. Then the horrifying thought came to me, what if it was a trick? What if I was dealing with a big predator, and that was just a way to get me out into the open, where I'd be more vulnerable? As these thoughts went through my head, I couldn't think clearly or rationally. I just left the area and did my best to describe how I felt. Now, 2 days after the incident in question, I was filling out reports at the ranger station when the dispatcher started shouting for me over the radio. The Greenstone Ranger Station sent the message. A few miles north of the Greenstone Station, there had been an accident. They needed me to help them. I got on the boat, and went in that direction. I met 2 other boats at the station, and we all went to the place where the accident had happened. It seems that 4 people who were hurt in the accident were being chased by a big black animal that they thought was Bigfoot. They told me I had a big head, big teeth, and big claws. We took what they said. They were so frightened and upset. They got into their boat, and ran into each other, which was a mistake. Even though they were hurt, they are all fine and only have minor injuries. The boats, on the other hand, are a different story. I often think back and wonder if the big figure I saw in the tall grass in that meadow had anything to do with what they said they saw in the distance. I was there. It was hard to tell what I was looking at, even though it looked like a bear. I could tell it was a big animal because of how it was lying and how much of its body was hidden. I couldn't really tell for sure what it was until I got closer. But the strange groaning and moaning sounds, I don't know how to describe them or explain them. I've heard bears make noise, even deer dying and injured. But this was not the same. It sounded like Basie but had a different tone. I guess it's safe to say that the whole thing is a little scary, and after listening to these witnesses' statements, I really don't think they're making up stories. All of them looked shaken. As we all told the same story, the one man, who was bigger and older, was shaking a lot and almost had tears in his eyes. Even though this happened a long time ago, I still remember it like it happened just last week. I've been in charge of parks and recreation for 20 years, and am now a superintendent for the National Park Service. When I worked in the back country, I saw and heard a lot of strange things. This email is to tell you about a cat-like creature I met in the back country. During the winter of 2010 and into 2011, this happened. I left the ranger cabin in the early afternoon and walked 4.5 miles up the trail to an emergency shelter in the back country. The first shelter burned down in the late 1980s, and this one is meant to take its place. It had been used by many people, but for the last 6 years, I was the only one to live there. I got to the shelter at 4 p.m. and put my stuff outside right away. I was working on my snowshoes when I heard a bellowing howl in the distance. I had never heard that sound before. I'm very familiar with wolf, coyote, and other animal howls, but this was different, way different. It was much deeper, and the wood had a lot more growl and walk to it. It was definitely not a wolf, an elk, a bear, or any other animal I know. It sounded like a bellow that went on for about a minute, with a short break between the bellows and howls. It was a very, very loud howl that made me feel just as scared as I did when I heard it. I was interested, so I put on my pack and snowshoes and started to walk toward the sound. About 3/4 of a mile away, on the ridge line, there was a big rise. As I got closer to the ridge, that's when I started to notice a lot of dead deer. There are a lot of deer in the area, by the way. I see them every day. We have a few different kinds, but the whitetail is the most common. I thought right away that something was after them. The 3 bodies I've seen were horribly mutilated when I looked at them more closely. Even stranger is that the dead people weren't eating. They just tore up the money. The one I was closest to had a hole in her neck and her head was missing. Something clearly went for this animal's head, but it didn't have any bite or claw marks. It just seemed like a brutal kill. I was thinking that something wasn't right. I hear the bellow/howl again, and this time it sounds louder and seems closer. I decided to climb up the ridge to see if I could find out what was making the noises, assuming that the creature making the noises was the one making the noises. As I got close to the top of the ridge, the bellows and howls started up again. This time, though, they were coming closer. As I got closer to the top of the ridge, I heard the noise coming from a small meadow. I saw this creature as I looked across the small meadow. It was standing on the other side of the ridge top. It looked like this strange thing. I call it a cat because that's what it looked most like, but it was way too messed up and different to be a cat. It was more like what you would get if you mixed a person with a lion and a mountain lion. I remember the brindle color and the ring around its neck very clearly. It was bigger than a mountain lion for sure. The animal was facing me, but at an angle of about 45 degrees, I could see its front legs very well as I stared at it intently. It didn't seem to move at all, and the sound it was making stopped. The whole time I was looking at it, I was trying to figure out what kind of animal it was, but I couldn't. It was on all fours and looked really weird. I think I might have been there for about 5 minutes. But in reality, I probably didn't look at it for more than 30 or 45 seconds at most. I started to think that I should leave before this giant cat or whatever it is sees me and decides to make me its next meal or do to me what it did to the deer. I could hear something coming up the hill behind me as I went down the ridge. I turned around and looked back up the path. 2 deer were running. When I turned around again, I could see that the cat was now coming toward me. So, I quickly walked to the end of the ridge and saw something walking about 75 yards away. It stopped every few steps as it went up the hill to look back at me. It kept walking around and looking until it was far over the ridge line and out of sight. I stayed there for about 5 minutes, and after that I never again heard bellow or howl. After that, I hurriedly walked back down the hill, packed up my things, and started the 6-mile walk around the cabin back to where I started. The longer route. I've never seen this creature again, and I think it's safe to assume that this was its territory, and it was hunting the deer because the part of the backcountry I was in and the whole ridge line are very untouched. Even after all these years, I don't remember much about that part. I told a few friends and co-workers, and they think I just saw a mountain lion from a long distance. But if it was a mountain lion, it was a severely deformed one. I've seen a mountain lion before, It wasn't this. In my work, I have seen a lot of mountain lions. I think it was trying to catch a deer on the ridgeline, but I might have made it mad. I've also heard similar eyewitness accounts of a similar creature in the National Park Service, but I've never found any real proof of its existence other than my own story. I'm emailing you because of this. I've never heard of anyone seeing a cryptid in the Smoky Mountains, but I have seen and heard of a number of strange things. Several of my co-workers have also seen strange lights over the mountains at night on different occasions. In fact, a park ranger, a friend of mine, and his girlfriend all saw a UFO over the park at the same time. I've never seen anything like that, but I believe what he says. He is an older man who has never been married and is single. He has no reason to make up a story. He's not good at telling stories or making jokes, either. He is also very, very serious, especially when he tells that story. He went into more detail and said that it looked like a big black triangle-shaped craft that hovered over the park for a while and then just faded out and went away. I know that strange things happen out here a lot. Keeping up the good work was part of what I saw and what I learned. I work at Lassen National Park in California as a seasonal park ranger. I just found your YouTube channel again. I had already forgotten about it. Maybe you remember me. When I was a student at Sacramento State, I was the one who sent you the email. I wanted to tell you about one more national park. We've seen a lot of strange things, like a creature that looks like a cross between a mountain goat and a wolf. We've also heard from more than one person who saw something that looked like a Bigfoot but walked on all fours and had a flat human face. In fact, my brother and I saw one of these things. We were both park rangers at the time, and we both worked seasonally at the time. On a Friday afternoon, my brother and I were working together when we came across what we thought was goat poop. It didn't look like mountain goat poop, though, so we knew it wasn't goat poop. We have seen mountain goats in this area before, but this cat was much bigger and darker. It looked new and almost still wet. We don't know what this might have been. No other animal in the park poops this big. People have also told us that the park is home to a huge black wolf that is twice as big as a normal wolf. People have said that it had red eyes and was as big as a Great Dane. This, of course, hasn't been proven yet. I've seen a lot of weird things in the park that I can't figure out what they could be. Even a woman said she was called Goatman, but we couldn't find anything when we looked, as strange as it is to look for these things. The woods always seem to get quiet and give you the feeling that you're being watched. This could just be my paranoia, but I feel a little less crazy when I don't let my paranoia run my life. And I'm just making things up, but I'm not sure what all these sightings are about, and I don't think they're all just mistakes. And speaking of that, I talked to a man about 7 months ago who had been in the east part of the park and had been attacked by what he described as a two-legged coyote or wolf. He wasn't sure what it was that tore his tent apart while he was sleeping at night and attacked him. It tore his arm pretty badly, but luckily they were able to save it and he didn't have to lose it. But he shot this thing several times in the face until it finally ran away. He said he has no idea what would have happened if he hadn't been heavily armed with his Glock. Most likely, he wouldn't be alive. He said the animal looked bad and was very, very big, but he kept calling it a coyote more than a wolf. It looked very human, not just because of how its eyes looked, but also because of how smart it was and what it was doing. He said that it seemed like it wanted to hurt him and also knew that it wanted to hurt him. In other words, it was just bad. Now, I don't know how to explain that, but I thought you might like reading about things like that. So that's why I want you to know about it. I know that there are some strange things out here in the national parks, especially in California. Based on that episode you posted a month or two ago about all the scary stories from California, which I find, to say the least, very interesting. Anyway, I don't know how to explain anything I've seen or done. Maybe you do? This seems strange. About a year and a half ago, in the Grand Teton National Park in 2018, I met a creature that I just can't figure out what it was. I've looked everywhere online, but I can't find anything that looks like the thing I saw. I try not to talk about this too much because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. During the 2018 summer, I worked for the National Park Service in Grand Teton National Park in the Inner Lakes District. My first year on the job, I worked in a campground on Blacktail Butte, just outside the main park. I was helping close down the campground with two other co-workers. As I was counting the money from the night before, I heard a clear but strange howl to the west of the campground. The sound seemed to come from where the mountain met the ground. The campground is located at the base of Blacktail Butte, which is a very small mountain just on the outskirts of the park. From where I was, I could see that the sound was coming from where the mountain was. Near the mountain, there were also 3 other campgrounds, so I could see all the other campers and people who worked there. Most of the time, there weren't any campers with their dogs at their sites, so that was one thing off the list. Also, there weren't any dogs around. I tried to figure out what this hell was or if it was a wolf, but it wasn't a coyote or a wolf. It was very different. While I listened, I heard another howl that was similar but not the same. I've never heard a coyote or a wolf make such a sound. It's hard to say what it is, but it sounded like the recording of Bigfoot calls that I can hear online right now. I want to say that you can look up the Ohio calls. Everything is on YouTube these days, so I'm sure it's there. But I kept listening, and the other rangers and people in the area did the same. I started to ask my other co-workers if they had heard the sound, but it seemed like nobody in that area had heard it. I felt stupid, so I didn't say anything. After a few seconds, I heard another very loud howl coming from the same place as the first two. This one was closer, though. I can ask everyone who I know if they heard it. Almost right away, they started acting weird and told me they hadn't. They were all so quick and nervous. Something tells me that they heard it, but they don't want to say anything about it. Why did they know that? I did not. And just as I was getting ready to leave, I heard a co-worker talking with him on the radio for a minute. As I was leaving, I could see a person walking in the area of the howl, but they were staying inside the tree line. But as I slowly moved up the mountain, I asked a co-worker if he had seen anyone in the area. As he had told me, he too had been walking around and patrolling the area. I told him about the sounds I had heard. I didn't know what they were, but I could tell that they were coming from the back of the campground. He got scared almost as soon as I brought them up. He came close to me and whispered in my ear that he's pretty sure he saw a tall, dark figure moving around in the back part of the park, but that he didn't want to get a good look at it because he felt in danger and fear right away. Now that he is talking to me, I can tell from the tone of his voice and the way he seems to be moving that he is worried, to put it mildly. I drove a little farther to try to see what he was looking at. He had told me that it was in the back part of the park, so that's where I went. After a short time, I'm pretty sure I saw what he saw. Because I saw something that was about 7 feet tall and the same dark color. I tried to get a better look at it, but I could tell it was close to the edge of the trees. It had already moved back into the woods after leaving a large meadow. I haven't told my other rangers, and they won't talk to me about it. One even told me I should stop talking about it if I knew what was good for me. Since then, this ranger hasn't talked to me and won't. I decided not to follow this thing when I saw that it went to the tree line. Also, keep in mind that it was pouring rain at the time, and even though the ground was hard, there should have been tracks. I went back later to look, but I didn't find any, especially in the wet part of the grass where I saw the thing enter the tree line. I didn't find any boot prints or animal footprints. After I went back to the office, I kept turning the house for almost the whole night. This time, there were more than one coming from the north end of the campground and the other from the east. I think there were 2 of these things and that they were talking back and forth. So now, if I hear or see something strange, I don't really talk about it with my co-workers because, for whatever reason, they seem hell-bent on keeping everything a big secret or conspiracy, and they won't talk about it. Maybe denying that this thing exists helps them deal with day-to-day life better. But I'm trying to find out what's really going on. Lastly, I want to tell you that what I saw was neither a person nor a person in a costume. What I saw cannot be explained in a way that would make it a person. The sizes were so off and messed up. It would not make sense. Even the way it moved was different. I'm also sorry in advance that my story and account aren't the most detailed, but you get what you get. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear my story. I work for the National Park Service as a ranger, and I'm sending you this message from my Facebook. I was reading your post during my lunch break and saw a few that were about the paranormal and a few that were about missing 411. I have been to these parks a lot, and have seen many strange things. In my 20 years of life, I've never seen anything that could be called paranormal or even supernatural. I have seen some strange things that I can't explain, but I have to be careful about what I call them and write down that they are natural events. My husband is also a park ranger. He has seen and heard more than I have and can't explain it all. At the moment, my husband is on the west coast and I am on the east. We both have parks, and some of them are the same and some are different. I'm also kind of a park naturalist, and I've been to many parts of parks that most people haven't been to. When I worked at Canyonlands, the thing that struck me the most is that I can't explain it. I was working at the visitor center for Island in the Sky. It was around the time that Canyonlands National Park was getting a lot of attention for being a dark sky sanctuary. People from the public came up to me and asked me how to see the night sky. One couple came in and talked about the stars and planets for a long time. The man, who was probably around 30 years old, went to the bathroom for a moment. His girlfriend asked, "Are we near a ranch where skinwalkers live?" I was surprised and said, "We are a long way away, probably more than an hour's drive." They told me that was good because they are not who they say they are. When I asked her what they were, she said they were dangerous creatures that stalked and manipulated people, but she couldn't tell me much more. She was acting very strange and restless, almost like a drug addict who is trying to get high. It was very strange, but I don't think she was high because she was very clear-headed. Even though what she said was weird, it wasn't drug talk. After a few more minutes of talking, her boyfriend came back, and the two of them left. I still wonder what she meant by that meeting and what she said. She seemed to know something. I'd love to know more about what she knew about them, but that should be a counter to something else. Again, I've been doing this job for well over 20 years, and while I've had some strange experiences like that, I've never really seen a ghost or some kind of demon. Before I end this email, I want to tell you one more story. So, this happened around the same time I was working nights and walking back to one of my vehicles, which was not my own. And maybe around 35 yards into the woods, I heard a voice that sounds very familiar say my name. I couldn't quite figure out who it was, but I knew the voice from somewhere. Someone in the woods was calling my name very softly. This made me feel bad because I knew that whoever it was did not mean well, if you get my meaning. Also, how did they know my name? It was clear they were following me. The situation was bad in every way. I called out to them, showing them my flashlight and gun, and told them to be sure. When I stopped talking, I realized how quiet the night was. Even the crickets had stopped making noise. I quickly went backwards to my car and drove away. I don't know what that was or who it was, but I'm glad I never found out. I wanted to tell you about this. I specifically saw this post on Facebook and wanted to share and talk to you. See, I work as a ranger in Arizona, and I went backpacking to the Grand Canyon. I wore the most conservative clothes I could find in October because I thought that would help me blend in with the landscape the best. I even went 3 days without shaving. I just wanted to be funny. Make the story funnier. I had a 3-day permit, so I just hiked into the Grand Canyon and camped at the bottom. At the end of the permit, I day hike out and back in. I did meet more people than I had expected. I thought it would be easier to tell my story to people who aren't from this area. So I kept my permit for 3 days and ate dinner at the El Tovar Hotel. I decided to sit at the bar and talk to the Canadians who were sitting next to me. I told him I was a park ranger, and we talked for a while about the Grand Canyon and backpacking. Then, one of the guys I was talking to told me that I had a very strange thing happen to me a few years ago in the canyon. I thought, okay, here we go. I'll ask him a lot of questions to find out more and write it down in my journal. He went on to say that a few years ago, they went to the Grand Canyon and were coming up the South Kaibab Trail, bouncing down the trail and enjoying the day, when his friend saw a man running from a fire behind him up the hill, very panicked and frantic, and he said to his friend, and this guy, who was apparently barely dressed and had a very manic, crazy look on his face, walked right by them, didn't say anything, and didn't He said that he and his friend had a strange feeling and couldn't stop moving. Along the path, there was a river, and there was a bridge that went over the river. They saw the fire department putting out a wild campfire. They almost wonder if the man who walked past them was the one who started the fire and was fleeing. So, they kept going down the trail, and after about 5 miles, it started to get dark. Also, they were about 6,000 feet. Both of them saw a huge dark figure standing in front of a rock. Almost everything that scared them the most was a long rock that was in their way. As they got closer to the bottom, they both talked about a big dark figure with black skin and big red eyes that was about 9 feet tall and walked like a man. They just kept going, trying to stay calm and get to the bottom again. It was also very dark, and they still had to walk 3 miles. When they got to the bottom, they knocked on the door frantically, and a park ranger came to ask if everything was okay. They weren't sure if they saw a bear or something else, but I think the ranger was sure they saw a big bear, even though they were sure it wasn't a bear or a mistake and that they were terrified and shaken. I thought you might be interested in their story. They told me they never told anyone about it because they thought people would make fun of them. But they also told me to do that when we talked. They have friends who are Apache and Navajo, and they both agree that there are some strange things going on in the canyon, especially at night. If you want to contact me, feel free to do so. I just thought you might be interested in this. From 2003 to 2008, I worked as a climbing ranger at Albany State Park in New York. This park is famous for its herd of free-roaming bison, and the number of unsolved murders that have happened there in the last 150 years or so. During 4th July weekend in 2007, I went through something I couldn't explain. I was put in charge of the entrance booth and hiking trails on the other side of Route 98 from the main campground. This was on the eastern side of the park. There was also a designated picnic area in the woods, which was quite a ways back. I drove to the park and parked my Hummer in the parking lot behind the picnic area. After waiting a few minutes in the car, they got out to open the gate to the picnic area. I saw a family of 4 sitting at a table as I was walking back to my car. They were in the middle of taking their food out of its packaging. I agree with them, please open the gate, and they pulled up to the booth. I thought I would be the only ranger working the rest of the weekend. I got it wrong. I was the 3rd ranger to work there. When I got there a little before noon, 1 ranger was just leaving. People were everywhere because it was a beautiful day. I had a lot of people stop by. At one time, I was helping 3 different groups of people, each with their own problems. There was a delay in getting water, it seems. So I tried to fix them by calling the utility companies. People didn't know where to go, so I had to tell them different ways to get there. I don't know how long I've been doing these things, but I started to notice that it was getting darker than usual. Earlier, I was getting ready to check the woods on the other side of the picnic area. The time change had just happened. Then I saw a car coming down the road next to me. The road was a secondary way in and out. It led to a small picnic area, and the very old Albany Cemetery. I didn't expect the car to show up out of nowhere. So I went back to the booth and watched it. Then I drove up to the area and stopped. I thought the area was closed, so I was confused. The driver and passenger got out of the car, looked around, and then got back in with a very suspicious look on their faces. They left the area and couldn't be seen anymore. I went to the booth right away and found the key to the radio, which we took with us. I called the ranger on call and told them what happened. The 2 people seemed suspicious, like they were looking for something. I also told them about the other park rangers who were responsible for the area. He said he couldn't do anything until the shift was over, which was around 8 p.m. I kept looking at the road for a while longer and then noticed that the light was getting dimmer. I wanted to see what was in the woods to the west of the picnic area, so I went there. The area was hard to get to, and you had to do some bushwhacking to get there. As I walked along the natural trail, I could see that there wasn't much light left. I stopped what I was doing and looked around. I noticed that it was now very quiet, with almost no sounds at all. I started to walk faster. I didn't like the idea of being out there by myself. As I walked along the path, I heard someone or something coming toward me. I stopped and looked around. I'm sure I heard someone breathe. Even though I was scared, I was able to find my flashlight and turn it on. The light beam shone on the area in front of me, and I could finally see what was about 15 feet away. The thing stood between 7 and 8 feet tall and was made of fern skins. It looked like a mixture of bear and a human. I put the radio to my mouth to call the on-call ranger again, but it wouldn't stop making the scariest growl I've ever heard. It raised its right arm and tried to eat me, but I turned around and ran as fast as I could down the trail. I knew I only had about a quarter mile to go before I would reach the open meadow area. I tried very hard not to look back, but when I did, I saw that the thing was easily keeping up with me. I kept telling myself that it was just an animal, and that there was nothing supernatural about it, but that didn't help. When I got to the open field, I fell down because I tripped over a fallen log. I was trying to get up and run away when I heard it coming. A shot went off, and I could hear twigs and branches breaking. Then the ranger on duty showed up and told me to sit down. The thing kept going around us, but it wouldn't get closer. 2 more shots were fired by the ranger. We could hear it trying to get away. He helped me to my feet and led me back to my booth. I fell and hurt my knee, but I didn't want to go to the hospital. We all agreed that we wouldn't say anything about this to our bosses or to anyone else. We know that we don't know what kind of retaliation there would be at work or if it could be career suicide. I have since moved to Georgia and started working for a private security company. I still hike and camp a lot, but if I can help it, I don't really go off trail.